as we're gathered together around God's Word. Uh, as most of you remember from last week, we made it most of the way through chapter 3. So right now we're at Ruth 3, verse 14. And knowing that Ruth 4 only has 22 verses, we'll see how far along we get. But just kind of the plan going forward, either today or next week, finish with Ruth. The plan is to finish today, but we will see. And then next week, going to the very next book after that, which gets to 1 Samuel. And 1 Samuel, where do you think it starts? Chapter 1, that's a good one. Yep. Starts with Samuel. So 1 Samuel starts with Samuel. Shocker, right? So we'll start with 1 Samuel, and that'll go through and kind of going along there, all the things with Samuel and Saul and David and Solomon, and then it'll be next fall.
So where do we start?
We're at Ruth 3, verse 14 is where we're at right now. So we got most of the way through Ruth 3 last week. And just kind of a quick recap. That's where Ruth went to Boaz, and in essence, by her actions, asked her to be the redeemer, meaning the one that would then basically a marriage proposal is a lot of what's going on here. But being the redeemer is, and we'll get to that, exactly what that is. First section of chapter 4, we'll get to that. But in essence, saying, will you marry me? Will you redeem the land, the family, and take care of Naomi? So she's basically asking a lot coming forward. So is it to a certain degree her coming forward between the two of them and asking privately, will you marry me? Yes. Is it a lot more than that also? Yes.
So she asked him.
In essence. And so that was why she came to him at night and went to it at his feet and put the covers over her. It was nothing untoward going on. It was completely her going forward and saying, would you? So, it's the symbolism there. I'll be at your putting your cover over me. Very much it's saying, would you put your protective hand over me as my husband? Is the image that's being brought there. But it's more than just over me. It's remembering, as it mentions so often here, she's a Moabitess. It's also including watching over Naomi. It's also including redeeming the land. It's also then putting this all forward for a different line than your own. And what that means, we'll get to when we get into chapter 4 here. So she was, by saying this, it was a lot more than just, will you marry me? Which is by her actions, what she was saying. And Boaz says, if it is possible, I will do it. And that gets us right here to verse 14. So I'll just read those words before. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he, the closer redeemer, does not redeem or redeems you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. So he says, I will do it. And you notice he doesn't say, I'll get around to it, does he? When does he say he's going to do it? In the morning. So we are going to do this now. Now, that doesn't mean the marriage is going to happen that day, but it means the decision and the actions are going to happen now, not one of these days. And so he then says, lie down until morning. Now, by morning here, it's not meaning when the sun rises. Now, right now, when does the sun kind of rise? Is it like about 8 or 8:15 now? It seems like something like that. And so, now by morning here, it means past when you're out and driving. You don't want to be out there right when the bars close, right? All sorts of things could happen. If when is that? Is that 1 o'clock? Two o'clock? Yes. Well, New York, I don't think there is a time. For the sake of argument, let's say 1 o'clock. So let's say the bars close at 1 o'clock. That means people are getting out on the road for the bars at what? 1:10 to 1:30 to 1:45. When would be a bad time to be out? Right in that vicinity. I kind of remember that when I was in college, paying my way through college. I worked at an Amoco station, gas station, and it starts getting quiet. And then once midnight gets there, I always did the midnight shift. I always did the 12 to 8 shift. And so midnight gets there, it's kind of quiet and everything. And then right after 1 o'clock, everything got busy. And then you're busy till about a little bit before 2 o'clock. Then everybody's gotten home. So in other words, there is a time not to be out driving on the roads and stuff, right? Not to be out and about. That's what's going on here. Lie down until morning. Lie down here until it's gotten through the night and you can get back home safely. That's what's going on here. So it's basically, okay, I'll take care of this in the morning. Stay here until it's safe for you to go back home. Because you've got, as we saw there, he had gone out, he'd had a couple of drinks. The words were happy in heart, right? Does that mean that there were probably some men out there that had more than that? Yes. So there were probably some gentlemen out there that had more than a merry at heart drink. We'll just leave it at that. So in other words, would it have been safe for her at that time to go back? No. So all that he's doing there is saying, let's wait until it's safe. Once everything is safe, then go back home. And so even here, what is his thoughts? Taking care of things, watching over Ruth, and making sure everything is in the right order and done so that everything is done appropriately. And all of chapter 4 is going to be Boaz doing the next right thing that needs to be done. So that brings us here to verse 14. We went counterclockwise last week. We'll go clockwise this week. So let's see here. Carol, would you read verse 14?
So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. So
she laid until morning, arose before one could recognize another. So in other words, it's still quite dark out, right? So once the sun's up, you know who's all there, right? Here, get up beforehand. So maybe before twilight-ish, something of that nature is what we're looking at. But this would have been about the same time that you had the women go to the tomb on Easter morning. So the thought was that they would get to the tomb once you had, as soon as the light shone, and do what needed to be done. So when they left, it was still dark. And so probably still had their oil lamps going down to the tomb. Here, same thing. Go before it's light enough for people to recognize what's going on. Go off there. Let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. Don't let the gossiping mouths talk, is what's going on. Will there still be gossip all over the place? We know sinful human beings. That is the nature of what happens. But he said, we'll wait on that for now. But right there, you can think going along the same family. Was there talk? The scripture doesn't say that there was, but do you think there was talk about Mary behind her back? Scripture does not say, and they were gossiping about her. However, there's a reason why at about the 6th month, she goes to her relatives and goes to see Elizabeth, right? There would be a reason behind that. And you could very well imagine if Mary had stayed in Nazareth during her last trimester or so, that she probably would have had to be one of those women who goes down to get the water in the heat of the day, just like the Samaritan woman did. Now, had Mary done anything untoward? No, absolutely not. Neither had Ruth here. And so neither one had done anything wrong. Nevertheless, sometimes you use a certain amount of wisdom just to minimize the talk and things that could happen. And that's all that's going on here. Go back when it's safe, but before any of the mouths start gossiping and talking around as it goes forward. So that's what's going on there in verse 14. Any thoughts right there?
Pretty much like it is today.
People don't really kind of change, do they? You still get all the stuff that will go around.
Will they make a decision before they know the circumstances?
They make a decision. I might be even a little harsher. I'd say they make a judgment. They've already been judge, jury, and now in gossiping tend to be the executioner of bringing forward. Can you believe? And the juicier the gossip gets, the quicker you run, right? The quicker it goes out there. But as we're going to see here, Boaz is not a man who tries to keep things secret. In fact, Boaz is a man who does everything up front and lets everybody know what's happening. Because remember, going back to chapter 2, he was saying out loud, so everybody knew, watch over this woman. I'm treating her like one of my women servants that are here, that's doing the work that's here. Everybody, you know what the deal is. And I'm even telling you guys over there, even take some of the stuff out of there and give it into her basket. I've said so, and everybody's heard this. And so throughout here, Boaz does everything as much as he can to be as open as he possibly can. Now, this was probably written underneath King David's reign. And how did the story, including these things, go forward? Ruth and Boaz probably were sharing this story again and again of all the things that had happened. You've heard me tell the story a couple of weeks ago, the story of when my wife and I met. We've met when I asked her to marry me, things of that nature. And we've told our kiddos that. And those will probably be stories that we'll probably hear back from us with grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the stories that we've already told our kids. That's what's happening here. So now wait until morning. Morning, the very twilight. Head out. Verse 15. Your turn.
And he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city.
So 6 measures, about as much as she could carry. Now you look here at that much barley. This is more. You remember that first day when she went out and she had, what was the number that she came back with? It was, I should have written it down. She goes out, she meets Boaz, she gleaned and took an ephah of barley. So she took an ephah of barley. That was enough to take care of a long period, several weeks. This is even more. So that was about 26 pounds. This would have been about 60 pounds.
In the bottom of the book here, it
Yep.
says an ephah was about 3/5 bushel or 22 liters.
A lot. You got it. And so that would have been enough really to take care of Ruth and Naomi for a monthish or so. Just this gift. So all that needs to really be known there, it was a lot that he gave her. So this was a preliminary wedding gift for what he was about to do. And so no matter what happens, because is it possible that the closest Redeemer would have done everything that needed to be done? It's possible. And he even said that before. However, here is the promise. And no matter what, I'm still going to take care of you. That's a pretty incredible thing, isn't it? Even if this all doesn't happen, I'll still be there for you. About as upright a man as you could get here with being Boaz. So he gives her this huge amount and put it on her, and she went into the city. And you notice the words, and put it on her. In other words, it wasn't, here it is. It was so much that he had to help her to put probably back. But on the other hand, they were really good at holding things on their heads too. Just and enough practice, you get really good at holding a lot of weight up there. You've seen pictures of the Middle East where they carry it up there on their heads. And that's now with our necks aren't as strong because we don't do that much. But you do that every day and your neck becomes very strong. And so probably and you see the women holding this huge amount on their heads, and then they got the baby on the back, the baby, and just strong women, strong women. But it was so much she couldn't just lift it up on herself. She needed help to carry it. That's how much was going on there. And she went into the city. And I just want to make a note here as we're going to get into chapter 4 today. She went into the city. So just to get an idea, and this is really gives the image of what's going on in chapter 4. You've got the walled city, right? Now, Bethlehem is mostly walled today, but that's for a completely different concept. In this day, Bethlehem was a walled city for defense against outsiders. So you had the walls around, and then you had the main gate, and you would come through the gate to your house so that if enemies or raiders or stuff came along, everybody would go into the city and you got a good defense. That's the concept that they would have had. So she goes into the city, meant, and usually there was one way to get in. If you've got lots of ways to get into a city, it's hard to defend. So you've got one big gate structure to defend your city. So she went in, and that's the part before that, so that nobody could recognize you. She had to get up and be going through the gate while it was still dark. So she had a little walk to go. How much, we're not sure. Mile, 2 miles, something of that nature, probably. Carrying this big load, going through the gate into where the house would be. And so that's the structure. And you'll see why I brought that up in just a few verses here. So she went up through the gate, up to her house, to where Naomi was. And then we get to verse 16.
When she came to her mother, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had
And so there you go. And so she said, and so I don't think Naomi slept much that night. She sent Ruth off, all of this, and she was waiting for word of what would happen and what would take place. And so she probably had been awake for a long time, waiting for Ruth. And probably as soon as Ruth comes in, how did it go? Tell me what happened. Well, and then Ruth says, this is all of what happened. So she recalls all of what we've just read. So then we get verse 17.
These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.
And so here is it again. Let Naomi know I'm going to take care of it, so that it's not just a word out there. Naomi, here's a lot. I will take care of things.
Do you think Naomi knew what Ruth was going to do?
Well, she had told Ruth pretty much what to do. And she was hoping that exactly what happened. And it did. But this is in essence to an arranged, kind of arranged marriage. So Naomi is the one, saying this is the next right thing to do. Naomi is going forward and doing all of that. But it's not the full arranged marriage where you get kind of both sides of the parents getting together and making the decision. There's a lot of other moving parts taking place in this whole situation. But she comes back with a load, and as she kind of comes in and gets it down, look at what was given. In other words, she did not come back empty-handed in either regards. She came back with a lot of barley, and that was now theirs permanent. There was no, but if this doesn't happen, you have to give it back to me. It was, this is yours, done. Okay, now we'll see where things go in the morning. We're almost to the morning. So we have verse 18 before we hit chapter 4.
She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.
Sit down and let's wait. And that would be a hard thing, don't you think? So they made sure he knew. They made sure, and all of this. Boaz, would you do this? Boaz says yes, both by what she heard by Ruth and by the gift that had been given here. So now we have to wait as Boaz goes and does what will take place. But she knows Boaz by this time, doesn't she? The man, she doesn't even say Boaz here, but we know who it is, will not rest, but will settle the matter today. He said it, it will be done. Chapter 4 is now he's making it done. Now it is going forward and will take place. And I'm sure once it was done, Boaz found Ruth and Naomi. And he was probably the one to let them know what had happened. That'd be my guesstimation. On the other hand, as he's doing this, word probably came back to Naomi quickly. And so as Boaz is there, because these things take a little bit of time, and as all of this is going on, we're not told this, but I could imagine that kind of as the talk goes very quickly, as the next verses are taking place, word came back exactly what was happening. And so there were probably some women coming in and out of the house, letting Naomi and Ruth know what was transpiring. So any thoughts on chapter 3 before we get to Boaz's actions? Okie dokie. So my turn. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now, Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So now we have the legal process taking place. So Boaz is going to do the act of redemption. And you notice he does it immediately. He does not wait on anything. He goes forward and does all of what needs to be done. So he gets this, sends Ruth off, probably gives, I don't know, who knows how much time, 10 minutes, lets her get in, get to the house, and then he comes along. So if Ruth is going to go through there at a time where nobody can see her face or know who it is, he comes not long after that. And so probably still a little before actual sunrise, Boaz is there. And why would he make sure that he gets there? He wants to get there before the closest redeemer gets there. So he wants to catch him on his way out. Like I said, though, you would live inside the city walls, and everybody would have to go out that main gate in order to go off to work, to do what needs to be done. So that's what's going on. He gets there before the workers go out to the fields. And especially during the harvest, a farmer is out there so that he can work when the sun gets enough to work, right? That's what a farmer does. And used to be, you were out there, getting out there, so as soon as you could work, you'd start working, and you'd do it all the way. As soon as the sun went down, then you would be as much as you could until no longer able to work due to the sun, and then come on in. Nowadays, farmers have the blessing curse of electrical lights. And so nowadays, you have farmers out there way into the dark on their taking care of their fields as they're bringing in the harvest. And so they don't even get the dark anymore to sleep, is how farmers kind of do it nowadays. But then you had at least the force of not able to see anymore to have to go in and get some sleep at night. Farmers work more than that during the harvest nowadays. Blessing, curse type thing. So he got there before everybody would go out so that he would be able to catch the other guy as he's going out to his fields. That's what's going on. Now we'll see in the next verses, he then also gets 10 elders of the city together. Probably what was going on is he was already starting to gather those elders as he was waiting. So as he gets there, he's got in his mind exactly what's going on. Make sure I'm here before the other Redeemer comes. And probably as he's sitting there waiting, he gathers the elders, the 10 elders of the city, to sit there with him. So he calls them together, and so probably gathering the elders already. And as the Redeemer comes through, he gathers him along too. It's just an interesting side note. You kind of see some of that even in the Middle East today, 3,000 years later, over 3,000 years later. The Arabic word for it is fuddle. In other words, what to fuddle someone in that culture is you're waving them on in. And even in that culture today, you'll wave a stranger in, you'll wave somebody on over, and you say, come on over to here, sit down, let's talk, and let's have tea. And boy, is it a sweet tea. If you go down south, a lot of times you have there are parts where the tea has to be sweet, and there are parts where that is an abomination. And it just depends where you're at as to what's good and what's not. In the Middle East, it is super saturated. There's sugar on the bottom still underneath the tea as you're drinking it. That's how much is added on to the tea. So once you're done with your tea, there's still sugar on the bottom. That's a lot of sugar. Today, they still will come, sit, let's talk. That's what's going on here. Boaz sits at the gate, waves on the elders. Come over here, sit down. We got business to take care of. The Redeemer, come on, come over here, sit down. We've got business to take care of. Now, would he have had an idea what Boaz was asking? Yeah. So when the Redeemer came through, he had an inclination already of what was going on and what was going to take place. This was not a complete out of nowhere thing that happened. But it was today that this would happen and take place. So and so this is, like I said, at the city gates where everybody went through. So the whole town knows what's going on. How many times, actually, this happened at my, how many times when you're driving along, all of a sudden you find yourself in a massive traffic jam solely because somebody got pulled over? How many times has that happened to us? Why? Mostly because everybody is doing that, right? What's going on? What's happening? What's taking place? At my first congregation, it was in Renshaw, Minnesota, about 300 people. It happened to me once where I was driving on home, and I got pulled over by the police. What had happened is I had renewed my tabs. I had put the tabs on. However, the computer system was not working correctly down in that St. Paul in the cities, that area. And so the person, cops run plate numbers, all that, those things all the time. And it came through that I had new tabs on there, but that my tabs had expired. So I got pulled over. And so the police officer talked to me, wrote me up a ticket, one of those tickets that basically, if what you're saying is true, then the ticket becomes null and void. But if you're lying to me, the judge is not going to be pleased with you. One of those type of things. And so all I had to do, it took me several days, was go to the main office where I had gone. They had the paperwork. Then I had to have them call down to St. Paul, have them figure things out there. Then I had to have St. Paul send the stuff up to Cloquet and send the stuff to the police department so that they could null and void that whole thing. So anyway, it turned out nothing happened, but it was a stressful couple of days getting that whole shebang figured out. Now, the point that I'm bringing up there, though, is evidently somebody had seen me pulled over. So at the next church council meeting, somebody brought up and said, I hear that somebody got pulled over speeding over there between. And so I ended up sharing with the whole church council the entire long thing that had happened. And it's like, no, I wasn't speeding. In fact, I wasn't. But I got pulled over for this other reason. Word goes around fast, doesn't it? And in the time that I was pulled over, there was only about 3 or 4 cars that went by. But that's enough. I think so. But they needed to be reassured that this is exactly, all of exactly. Suffice to say, that happens today. What happened? As people were walking and Boaz was calling people over and having this meeting, word got out exactly what was going on. So this is a citywide thing that's now happened and taken place. So Boaz goes up there, turn aside, friend, sit down. And he turned aside and sat down. And just one last thing right there. He says, turn aside, friend. This gentleman who was the closest redeemer is never mentioned by name. Everybody else is mentioned by name, probably because when this was written down, they did not want to embarrass that family anymore. They did not want to put down for for the years to come by the king this is the family that had not done what they should have done. And so it's probably very intentional that this man's name is never mentioned here.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, probably very intentional. And so, did the family know? Yes. However, would the family have, quite frankly, easily forgiven them, knowing this whole story? Yes. But you didn't, even though everything is right, you still don't need to put anything out there to embarrass another family. So he's never mentioned here in Ruth, and that's probably the reason. So he's sitting there, sit down, friend. Come over here. Let's have some tea before you head off to work. Let's talk. Let's get some business done. So we're up to verse 2. Carol.
And he took 10 of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down.
Do you notice a word that's mentioned a lot in here? Let's sit. And so, like I said, that's still a lot of the culture there still today. Let's all sit down, talk about these things. And so Boaz is sitting, calls the Redeemer, come down, sit down, gathers together 10 of the elders. How did he do that? They were coming by the city gate. Come over here. Let's sit down. Come on over. Billy Bob, come over here. Let's sit down. Let's talk. We got business to take care of. It also shows a little bit of the respect for Boaz too, doesn't it? Because many of them could have said, no, I've got to go do this. Instead, no, this is first things first needs to be done. Now, when we get to Jesus' parables, remember the parable of the king who invited many of his subjects to the wedding banquet of his son, right? And you run into, no, I can't be there because I've got a wedding. No, I can't be there, or I've got this thing. No, I've got to take care of my land. No, I've got business deals to do. No, I've got other things to do. So you've got a lot of people that are rejected that said, no, I've got something else to do. Now, that was horrendous, really, in this culture to say that to the king. And you can kind of see here what they did in this old little town of Bethlehem, right? They said, come, let's sit down and talk. And what did everybody do? They sat down and talked. So for those people to have rejected the invitation of the king was a slap in the king's face. Because any level, you sit down and you talk with what's going on here. And this is just what they did. So they even laid aside the harvest. And anybody that knows farmers, that's a big deal. To say it's the harvest time, we need to pause to take care of something else. That's a big deal. And I think I brought it up before as well. That's why, especially thinking of my first congregation, I greatly respected several of the farmers that would time it so that they would kind of get off of the machines, come into worship on Sunday morning, go right back off to the machines. God bless them, because they laid aside, an hourish, but when the harvest is coming in, that's a big deal. Laying aside the time, no, I'm still going to be in worship. Now they came in dirty, dusty. Praise be to the Lord. They were giving a lot in order of their time to be there for worship. And any farmer that is willing to do that, that is a highly respected person in the church that's willing to do that. And that's what they're doing here. They're laying aside the work of the harvest to take care of what needs to be done. So they all sat down. So verse 3, now we're down to business. Let's hear whose turn. Oh, I think, Kara, did you?
Didn't she already have it?
area. What's going on here? Planning on coming back. So they had gone off, they had gone to Moab, and as you're leaving, you sell what you've got. So he sold the usage of the land to somebody else. So it's not is selling, it was sold 10, 11 years before this when they headed off to Moab. So it had been sold. The usage of it is what had been sold. And so this has been sold. So the Redeemer would buy that back from whomever it had been sold to. That was the job of the Redeemer. And you've got the elders all gathered together and hearing this. And the elders gathering together would have been, I had to write this down, were responsible for the judicial, the notarial, the representative, and the cultic actions that would have taken place within the city. They were the witnesses and the adjudicators of the city. So when you have the 10 gathered together, they are the ones saying this has happened. If you only have one witness, well, you can make argumentation, right? So you have a good crowd of witnesses seeing any legal transaction. And the legal transaction here would not have been written down and put away. This was a verbal legal transaction. And so now you're going to have the transaction. That's why you had the 10 elders gathered together to witness the legal transaction. So whatever happens, you cannot go back and say this didn't happen. Whatever the legal decision is made, you've got these 10 men who are there, who witnessed and who said, no, this is what happened. It is down. It is legal precedent. This has happened. Don't come trying to say it didn't. So that's why you have this group of elders. And they would have done, like I said, all that kind of work that would have happened and taken place. Now with the usage here, and I actually had to look this up. The English word is, I'm probably mispronouncing it, usefrucht. Usefrucht. How many of you use that word often? How many of you know that word? I didn't until yesterday. Usefrucht is when you are giving somebody else permission to use your land for business purposes, farming, whatever kind of purposes that is. You still own the land, but you give it to somebody else. We've got an English word for it. Now, an English word I'd never heard of before. Nevertheless, that is the word that's used for this. That's what's going on here. So when they went off, they had their land for usufruct of another person. I'm proud of myself. And that person gave a certain amount of money, and that's what they had to live on when they went off to Moab. That's why when she comes back, she's penniless. She still kind of owns the land, but has no usage of it. That's what's going on here. So he says to here, she's come back. Has sold. That's why the is selling is a continuing action type thing. So in other words, it is still being sold, but all the money was given 11 years ago. But so that's what's taking place with the land here. So he says, this is what's happened. So then we get to verse 4.
So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of these sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, so tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. So he said, I will redeem it.
Boaz is being very upfront, isn't he? And quite frankly, this is close to a slap in the face to this man that's here. Because did he know Naomi was back? Yes. The entire city knew that Naomi was back. He had responsibilities enumerated in the Levitical law in the Pentateuch that this is what you will do as the Redeemer because of your position. Had he done it? No. Somebody else had done it. So you can, and it actually gives us a pretty good indicator here. Put a little bit of sarcasm into this. So I thought that I might mention this to you in front of all the elders of the city that maybe you should do what you should have been doing for the last several months. That's pretty much what he's saying. How would you feel if somebody had kind of said that to you? And so, not good at all. And so that's where you then get to. So, tell me, are you going to do what's your responsibility? Because if you're not going to do what you need to do, I'll take care of things. And would Boaz have done it? Absolutely. So that's what's going on here. He's bringing forward to everybody. You didn't do it. I have been taking care of what you have not been doing. Are you now going to take care of what you should have been doing from the beginning?
So he should have done that as soon as she came out.
Yep. So, or very quickly. He knew his responsibilities. The city knew his responsibilities. He knew she was back. She knew the responsibilities of this man. And he had not done it. And so it would be a sin of omission. He knew what he should be doing, and he chose not to. And probably to a certain degree, he probably was thinking, after a little while, Boaz is taking care of it. Oh, that's kind of nice. So now he then says, okay, fine. Under pressure, I will redeem it. Now, does he really want to do that? Probably not. However, he knows like I said, everybody knows the business taking place. He knows Boaz is coming in. He knows Boaz is bringing this forward. He knows there's the possibility that since he's been taking care of Ruth, that he might want to be, that there's a marriage thing that might be wanting to take place there too. So you can see the business wheels running in his mind, can't you? Sure, I'll redeem it. How much are you willing to pay me not to? You can see the wheels starting to turn there, can't you? But Boaz is not going to have any of that. But Boaz is smarter than that. So, sure, I'll redeem it. Why shouldn't I, Boaz? You can see those wheels taking place. So let's then go to the next verse.
And Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance.
Now, this is actually a little bit of a difficult thing right there, because the Pentateuch talks about what needs to be done for the Redeemer. It talks about the land. It talks about the actions. It talks about making sure everybody is taken care of. The one thing that's not part of the law is what Boaz says right there. You must take the widow of the dead. Now, if she was Israelite, that'd be different. She is a Moabitess. So, according to Levitical law, technically he did not need to then help to perpetuate the other person's line because she was a foreigner, a Moabitess. Remember, Boaz was going above and beyond to take care of her as a foreigner. So he went beyond what the law needed to be done. He's kind of adding the same thing here too, which makes good sense. I mean, this is the spirit of the law. The way that Boaz is using the law here is the same way Christ teaches the law as well. When he says, I tell you, when he talks about committing adultery, he says, I tell you that if a man has looked at a woman with lust in his eyes, he has broken the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. He has already broken that commandment. That's not the letter of the law. The letter of the law is you will not have sex with somebody who is not your wife. Period. Jesus greatly expands that and shows that we can't keep all the commandments. So he goes to the spirit of the law with the intent in there. Same thing that Luther does, following what Jesus shares when he goes through all the commandments with the what does this mean? The sins we should do, and the sins of action, of commission, and omission as well. So with that being said, what is Boaz doing here? He's really getting more to what is the spirit of the law, which is to help keep the family going forward, that this is not the end of that household. So he is expanding the law here, rightfully so. But you could make the legal argument that this is not the letter of the law in the Old Testament. So there's a little stickiness there as Boaz increases what's covered under the law. And he says, if you're going to redeem the land, you must also take care of the family. What was the point of redeeming the land? To take care of the family. So in this situation, he says, you must fully do all that needs to be done. And the sticky wicket here would be that then all the work of buying the land and all of that would go to that family, not to the Redeemer's family. So you would buy back the usage of the land, and then eventually, once you got to the 40 years, it would revert back to that family. But then this Redeemer would be able to use that land in perpetuity for however many years until you came to the season of Jubilee. So in other words, he would more than make his investment back by buying back the land. So he would make a lot of money off of it. And then a decade, 2 decades down the road, then the land could revert back to that family. But then there's no children in that family. So in essence, you would keep it for yourself. Here, though, he's saying, and children for that family. So in other words, that's what's to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance would mean you would then help to make sure that Ruth had a child, and that child would be of Naomi's household, not your household. All the money made from that land would go to Naomi's household. All the land that you bought back would go to her household. In other words, this is a pure, gracious gift, not I'm getting for myself.
Didn't Boaz do this wouldn't he have done it anyway?
Yes,
I mean,
but you had to do it right.
yeah,
But yes,
his intention from the very beginning was to take care of them however long it took.
exactly.
So the
Exactly.
Redeemer thought that maybe he was doing something that Boaz wouldn't have done, that Boaz had already decided to do it.
Yep. Well, and you get also to where the closest redeemer was thinking, what can I get for myself in this?
Right. He was giving up.
Yep. And the Boaz was acting out of grace, out of love. Boaz is a image of Christ's love for us, just doing whatever needs to be done to buy us back. In our case, buying us back from sin. We were bought back from sin at a price.
Christ dying on the cross.
The blood of Christ on the cross. That's the price at which we were paid. And that's just given to us out of grace and mercy. And just to point forward, that's why, and we're not going to get to this verse today, but if you get to, let's see here, verse, well, just verse 14. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, which is more than 7 sons, has given birth to him. There is, in verse 17. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. Notice that verse right there. A son has been born to Naomi, not Ruth, not Boaz. So this son that was born, now was it the son of Ruth and Boaz? Yes. But you see what's going on there. This is Naomi's son. So all the inheritance would go to him, not to Boaz's household. Ruth was kind of brought into Boaz's household. Naomi, although she was cared for, watched over, all of that, was still of the house of Elimelech. And so then this child was the one that followed as the son of Naomi, so that all of this was given to him. And then let's get to the last verse here, verse 6 for today. Then the Redeemer says, in that case, then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. And all of what I just said, that's what's going on here. I don't want to impair my own inheritance. In order to do all of what I said, what would happen to his own wealth? Part of it would be transferred to somebody else, right? So he would have to give up, and here he's being pious. I'd have to give up my inheritance, meaning the stuff for my children, to take care of this other family. What did Boaz do? Exactly that. But he was not going to impair it. So he knew by taking on Ruth, it would not be gaining his own inheritance. He would be giving it up to somebody else. And Boaz is willing to absolutely do that, to give up a lot to take care of this family. Could Boaz have just married Ruth? Yeah, he could have made that happen. She was a Moabitess. Okay. Instead, he goes through all of this to take care of Ruth and to take care of that whole household as well. Now, like I said, I didn't know if we'd get all the way through. We didn't. So we're at verse 7. So next week, we'll start at verse 7. And I'll actually have some things ready as we can then go into the birth of Samuel. And really, you're looking at time-wise, First Samuel and the ending of Ruth are fairly close to one another. So it really kind of this whole image of what's going on in Bethlehem and how they're working and everything transfers to all the beginning of the ministry of Samuel as well. But we'll get to that. Why don't we end with a word of prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank and praise your name for all that you have done. Guide us and lead us, Lord, always remembering that you are our Redeemer. And by that, we have been bought by a price, the price of Jesus' blood on the cross. In your holy name we pray.